I now have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for today's session. Dr. Rachel Vickers-Smith is an assistant professor in the College of Public Health at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Vickers-Smith is a graduate of UK, earning her doctoral degree in epidemiology and biostatistics in 2016. Her research is focused on changes in the illicit drug supply and harm reduction practices to keep people safe in an opaque market. We welcome Dr. Vickers-Smith to today's session.
All right, so I have no financial disclosures to report. What we're going to be talking about today is rapid drug checking, and for the most part, that's going to be fentanyl test strips, and we'll also talk about xylazine test strips, and talking about them as a harm reduction strategy that people can use to stay safe from overdose. And it's really critical to understand how these technologies work, their limitations, and also their benefits in order to mitigate the negative impact of the unregulated illicit drug supply on people who use drugs. So by the end of this, I hope that you'll be able to explain the significance of rapid drug checking, describe the existing technologies, their advantages and disadvantages. We'll also be talking about perspectives from people who use them. And also, I'll touch on some of the legal challenges of rapid drug checking across the US and within Kentucky. And I hope that you will walk away understanding how it works and how they can be useful in harm reduction practice, and also to know how to access these resources and how they can be integrated into a number of different settings. Okay, so prior to 2013, we really had this prescription opioid overdose wave. And as there were more regulations and reformulation of prescription opioids, particularly OxyContin, then we saw heroin emerging. And you'll see that here, this kind of top blue line here are the prescription opioids. You see that wave cresting around 2010. And then you see heroin, which is this dark blue, Kentucky blue maybe, wave coming up and cresting around 2016, 27. And then you see this gray line that increases exponentially from 2013, and especially so over the last couple of years. So we are in this third wave of the opioid epidemic, which is largely driven by fentanyl, synthetic opioids, primarily fentanyl. In 2013, fentanyl was involved in 4% of overdose deaths. And in 2021, fentanyl was involved in 66%. And we know from early data, it looks like that has increased for 2022 as well, up to 68%. And so many of these overdose deaths were the result of, at least for fentanyl, were the result of unintentional fentanyl use. And what was happening is that people who were using heroin were finding that their heroin was adulterated with fentanyl or completely or substituted. And I think that was really what it looked like in the beginning. And we know now that fentanyl can be found in any pressed pill, opiates, benzodiazepines, stimulants. It can also be found in methamphetamine and in cocaine, as well as other street drugs. And so in the midst of this fentanyl overdose crisis, harm reductionists provided urine drug test as what they were hoping to be as a stopgap strategy while coming up with a larger scale solution. And so these rapid tests, like I said, harm reductionists are using them as a harm reduction tool. So you have kind of this harm reduction as a philosophy, but also you have harm reduction tools, and hopefully they will both exist together. But harm reduction tools can be used without it coming from really a harm reduction philosophy. And so harm reductionists are driven by these principles. And I put them all up here. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir right now and reviewing things that you all already know. But I think it's really important to think about how harm reduction really fits into this this harm reduction philosophy. And so what it does is it accepts that licit and illicit drug use is part of our world. So fentanyl is here, it's not going anywhere. And so what can we do to minimize the harm rather than just ignore it, push it underground, or condemn it? It also calls for non-judgmental and non-coercive provision of services and resources. So, there's nothing behind. It's not when people provide these test strips in a harm reduction setting, it's really to in a non-coercive way. It also affirms that people who use drugs are the primary agents of reducing their own drug-related harms. So what are fentanyl test strips? I'm sure all of you have seen them, but what they are just small paper strips that were originally developed to detect fentanyl and norfentanyl in urine. And so, of course, when harm reductionists were providing them, they were wanting to provide them so that people who use drugs could test their drug solution and know ahead of time whether there might be fentanyl in their drug supply, rather than downstream after they have already used the drug and then to have to test it in their urine. But it's important to note that these drug test strips were developed to be tested to test urine. And so the detection limit for strips currently on the market are about 10 to 20 nanograms per milliliter. And a nanogram is a tiny amount. I had to write it down so I wouldn't forget, but a nanogram is there are 1 million nanograms in 1 milligram. So these strips are designed to detect very small, low concentrations of fentanyl. But again, these limits are typically published for urine concentrations, not drug solutions. And so if you think about the drug going through the body and being metabolized, when it comes out in the urine, it's going to be highly diluted. Whereas when you have a drug solution, you have a highly concentrated drug. And so figuring out a way to do the correct dilution in order for these strips to be useful is really critical. The test strips are qualitative tests. They just give a negative or positive. They don't tell you purity or potency. It just gives you a yes or no answer. And I like how Dance Safe puts it. These are meant to be red flags, not green lights. Okay, so how do they work? Bear with me for a little bit. I'm not an analytical chemist. I am not a toxicologist, so I'm going to explain this in a way that makes sense to me, but it's not going to be technical. So these fentanyl test strips are paper-based lateral flow immunoassays. And so again, they are small, tiny strips that have a bunch of components on them. So you have these antibodies with the red circle. These are colored antibodies that want to bind to fentanyl. Okay, and then you have these non-specific antibodies, these just plain Ys, and they'll bind to anything. These green pentagons are the target molecule. For us, this is fentanyl. This is the fentanyl molecule in this diagram. And then you have the matrix components, which are just other parts of the drug solution. So it could be other drugs, it could be fillers, just other things we aren't interested in when we're using this test strip. So the test strip itself has this conjugate release pad, this blue pad here, and that's where the antibodies, the colored antibodies that want to bind to fentanyl live. They are staying there, and as water comes up the strip from left to right, as you see this water flow direction, these colored antibodies will move across the strip with the drug solution. Okay, then you have these stationary antibodies. These are the plain Ys that will bind to anything, and currently they are bound in the existing strip. They are bound to fentanyl. So this is the fentanyl molecule, and so there is a line in the test strips that has non-specific antibodies bound to tiny fentanyl molecules. And then you have this control line, which is non-specific antibodies. Again, those are the ones that will bind to anything. So this test and control line of non-specific antibodies, they're immobile. They're not going to move. Okay. So taking all of that information, we can look at two different scenarios. So the first scenario here in panel B, this is our drug solution. We've diluted it. And in this solution, there's no fentanyl. You don't see the little green pentagon. So there is no fentanyl in this. And so what happens is when you dip the fentanyl test strip into the solution, remember the solution will move from left to right. And as it moves, these colored antibodies will move across the test strip, left to right. And so as they come across these stationary antibodies that have bound to the fentanyl molecule already, remember these colored antibodies want to bind to the fentanyl molecule. And so when they pass over this immobile line of fentanyl bound antibodies, then it binds to those. And so that's why you see in the test line, you see color, which is the reverse of what we typically think about, say like a pregnancy test or a COVID test. 2 lines usually means positive. In this case, 2 lines means negative because of this very issue, okay? The antibodies have bound to the existing fentanyl molecules on the test strip, okay? Then whatever colored antibodies don't get to bind, there's only so many positions, so not everybody gets a seat. It continues to move to the right. And so again, they will bind to these plain non-specific antibodies that will bind to anything, right? And so you get 2 lines, all right? Then if we look at panel C, this is a solution that does have fentanyl in it. Okay, you see the little green pentagon. So again, we're going to dip the strip into the solution. The solution is going to move across the strip from left to right. Again, as it goes, it will come into contact with this conjugate release pad where the colored antibodies that want to bind to fentanyl live, right? So immediately, these colored antibodies will bind to the fentanyl in the solution, okay? Because that's happening first. That's happening here before it ever gets to the test line. So then as these colored antibodies continue to move across the strip, they don't bind to the fentanyl molecules here in the test line because they're already bound. The colored antibodies are already bound to the fentanyl that was in the solution. So it's this competitive binding. Where can this colored antibody bind first? Does it bind to the fentanyl in the solution first, or does it bind to the test line first? Okay, so because in this scenario, the colored antibody has already bound to the fentanyl molecule from the solution, it cannot bind, it's not able to bind to the test line, all right? But it does still bind to the control line because that antibody will bind to anything. And so it binds there, giving the user a clear indication that the test has indeed worked. So that I had always wondered, it didn't make sense to me why negative was 2 line and a control, a positive was 1 line. And so this was really eye-opening to me when I saw this diagram, and it makes a lot of sense. So that's something that is really important, though, to make sure that people who are using these test strips are really clear. It's not an intuitive result reading. 2 means negative, 1 means positive. No line means didn't work, or if only there's a test line and not a control line, then also it probably didn't work and would need to be tested again. All right, so I gave you kind of the behind the scenes look. And like I said, I know that many of you have probably used fentanyl test strips, shown them to your clients, provided them to clients, so you know what they look like. But for those that don't, I wanted to show this. And also it goes into detail about how to test different solutions. So there's this video and then there's another one that we'll watch right after it. Please let me know if you don't hear sound.
I'm going to walk you through how to test 3 different substances with a fentanyl test strip. Pills, powder cocaine, and heroin. The techniques for all 3 are slightly different to get the most accurate reading from the fentanyl test strip. You'll need the fentanyl test strip, water, and something to mix your drugs in. If you have access to a harm reduction organization, you can find the supplies there. And if you don't, then clean water and a bottle cap is fine. I'm going to show you how to test the benzodiazepine pill. We're going to break the pill in half. I'm going to get the cooker. We break the pill in half because the important part is we want to scrape from the middle. I'm going to use a dime. You could use a key or whatever you have on you. Scrape some in the cooker. Add some water. Grab the fentanyl test strip. We're going to hold the fentanyl test strip in this substance for 15 seconds. I'm going to put it somewhere flat. You'll have your results in under 2 minutes.
Sorry, I don't know.
Grab the fentanyl test strip. We're going to hold the fentanyl test strip in this substance for 15 seconds. I'm going to put it somewhere flat. You'll have your results in under 2 minutes. The next substance we're going to test is cocaine. Before use, we're going to get our cocaine. We're going to get the cooker. I'm going to use a micro scoop. I'm going to put a very small amount of cocaine in the cooker. I'm going to add some water. Get the fentanyl test strip. I'm going to put it in here for 15 seconds. And again, flat surface, cooker works. And you'll have your results in under 2 minutes. Now, I'm going to show you how to test your residue from the bag. That's an empty bag. I'm going to get our fentanyl test strip ready. I'm going to open the water. I'm going to open the bag. I'm going to add the water directly to the bag. I'm going to put the fentanyl test strip in, lay it flat. Again, the cooker's fine. You'll have your results in under 2 minutes. And lastly, I'm going to show you how to test heroin with a fentanyl test strip. I'm going to get the syringe, the heroin. I've already mixed up some heroin in the cooker. It's important to draw up our heroin first before we test it so we can test the residue that's left in the cooker and the cotton. I'm going to add some more water. We're going to get our test strip. We're going to hold the fentanyl test strip in this substance for 15 seconds. I'm going to put it somewhere flat, and you'll have results in under 2 minutes. After you wait your 2 minutes, you get your results. If you have a negative result, you'll have 2 lines. And if you have a positive result, you'll have 1 line. An easy way to remember that is that no has 2 letters and a negative result is 2 lines. Another important thing to remember is to read your results under well-lit conditions, because the second line in a negative test can be very faint. When somebody's drugs do test positive for fentanyl, they can use them slower, they can use less at one time. Make sure you're not using alone. Use somewhere where there's street traffic. Hold your Narcan in your hand so if somebody walks by, they can make sure that they see it, and just stay as safe as possible.
Okay, so I want to also show you a quick video of how to test meth, because as that other video mentioned, that does require a different dilution in order to avoid false positives. So let me.
Substance. All right. Now let's talk about testing meth. Meth just requires a little bit more water. I guess I should say a lot more water. The reason why you have to dilute meth down so much is because a false positive will come up if it's not diluted enough. I know it seems ridiculous or that it's an extra step, but it is critical that you dilute meth with at least a half cup of water so that you don't get a false positive, and so that you know what you're using. So this kind of shows us, if you do not have a measuring cup, this is a half cup of water in a big gulp cup. This is a smaller cup, and then a water bottle with the top cut off. Once you get a half cup of water, I mean, I understand it's not going to be precise, but at least you can kind of start eyeballing it. Once you have that water in there, you're going to want to put the residue from the meth in. You don't want to test shards, specifically residue, and same process. You then put the strip in for 15 seconds and then read it within 5 minutes. So it's the reason why we have these strips, and the reason why we are giving these out is because it's so important to be able to know what substance you're using. Fentanyl is very, very potent and is in substances that you aren't aware. So if there is fentanyl present, and you are aware of that, it can reduce your risk of overdosing. Things you want to do are do a test shot if fentanyl is present. Make sure you have naloxone. Make sure that you aren't using alone.
Okay. So I want to continue on talking about how well they work for drug solutions. So remember, I said that these test strips were designed to test urine. And so when identifying a drug in urine, it's going to be highly diluted. It's not going to have a very high concentration. So there was a study recently by Berg and colleagues of 4 commercially available fentanyl test strips, fentanyl test strip brands. And they tested solutions of fentanyl along with 28 fentanyl analogs, including carfentanil, as well as 4 non-fentanyl synthetic opioids, which include methadone and some other synthetic opioids, as well as amphetamine, cocaine, heroin, LSD, MDMA, meth, morphine, and THC. And so they tested all of these different drug solutions in varying concentrations. These were all single component solutions, so that just means that there was only, if it was testing fentanyl, there was only fentanyl and pure water in the solution. MDMA, there was only MDMA and pure water in the solution. And then they, like I said, varied the concentration and used the test strip to see whether it came up positive or negative. They also assessed cross-reactivity with ascorbic acid and heroin, because ascorbic acid is often used to as an acid to help cook heroin. And then they also looked at the additive effects of multiple fentanyls within a single solution. And so here are some of their results. I highly recommend looking at the paper if you would like to see all of the results, but let me orient you to this figure. So in panel A here, you see the results, pictures of what the results are as provided on the package or the product insert. So they say one band, only the control band is positive. Two bands are negative, no matter how light this test band is. And if only the test band or no bands appear, then that would be an invalid result. In panel B here, these are positive fentanyl results for 1,000 nanograms per milliliter, and negative, which was just water. There was nothing else in it, for the 4 different brands. So this, the blue is one brand, then these two, and then these here at the bottom. And so you can see when fentanyl was tested, there was a bright red line. And then when the water was tested, there was a fainter test line. In panel C, you see fentanyl test strips that are tested. These are just 2 brands that tested fentanyl in decreasing concentrations. So you see that here is 250 nanograms per milliliter all the way down to 0, and that would be the water control. And so what they did was they identified kind of a gradient of positive to negative, that it really is not this cut and dry positive negative, 2 lines or 1 line, that it really kind of depends on the concentration as to whether this line will appear or not. And so at a higher concentration of fentanyl, they called this, let's see, clearly positive. The 2 pluses are clearly positive. There is no test band. You can see here, it's just faintly starting to show up a little darker with decreasing fentanyl concentration. At 50 nanograms per milliliter, this was considered positive still, but there was a barely visible T-band. And then they had a weak positive, which was at 25 nanograms per milliliter, where the test band is a little darker. And then these solid minus signs were negatives because the concentration was so small. So you can imagine when someone is using a test strip that seeing some of these other results, it's not so cut and dry. And so I think what really hit me about this was the importance of education and talking through what scenarios someone might come across when they're trying to test their drugs to see if there is fentanyl in them. So thinking about the selectivity and sensitivity of fentanyl test strips, and this same study, they found that all the test strips detected fentanyl, and 21 to 24, depending on the brand, of 28 fentanyl analogs. None, interestingly, gave a positive result for carfentanil at 1,000 nanograms per milliliter or less, which is concerning. So at at this 1,000 nanogram level, the test strips were not identifying carfentanil and coming up positive as a positive result. There were 3 brands that were positive when the carfentanil solution was 4,000 or more nanograms per milliliter. And according to some toxicology studies, the potentially lethal dose of carfentanil is around 4,000 nanograms per milliliter. So it does look like 3 of the 4 were identifying carfentanil at that level, but less, it was not. When ascorbic acid was present, the results still were clear, but they were just smeared lines. It was harder to see them. You can see that here. The AA indicates ascorbic acid, so that's vitamin C. You can see that the lines are a little bit blurry. Carfentanil and rimifentanil gave positive results in ascorbic acid, but gave negative results in water. So you can see that here. And I mentioned that they also looked for interference of heroin, and the addition of heroin into the fentanyl solution did not impact results. So they were still coming up correctly. There's another study called the Forecast study that compared 3 technologies. They compared them against each other and then also against a gas chromatograph or mass spec, GCMS, which is considered the gold standard for drug testing. And so these technologies were BTNX rapid response fentanyl test strips here. There was this TrueNarc Raman spectrometer that was kind of a portable spectrometer, and then this FTIR mechanism. I know that there was a drug checking talk a couple weeks ago, I think. So I'm not going to go into detail to what these are, but just to give you an idea of what fentanyl test strips were being tested against. And what they found was that fentanyl test strips have the lowest detection limit. So meaning that the lowest concentration, the fentanyl test strips were able to identify fentanyl correctly at the lowest concentration among all of the technologies, including mass spec, which is pretty remarkable. So it has very high sensitivity and high specificity as well. So I know I keep saying this, but fentanyl test strips are designed for use in highly diluted samples. And so when you have a highly concentrated sample, this can cause false positives. There was another study by Lockwood and colleagues that tested one brand of fentanyl test strips against 4 common cutting agents, diphenhydramine, alprazolam, gabapentin, and naloxone buprenorphine, as well as 3 illicit stimulants, cocaine, meth, and MDMA at various concentrations. And here are their results. So again, you see this, these decreasing concentrations of drug. You see the controls. One had a pH of 6, one a pH of 8, and those are all negative. You can see that cocaine all came up negative, although at higher concentrations, you do see that line is becoming fainter, that test line. Meth, MDMA, diphenhydramine, 2 different formulations, they were negative at 1 mg per mil or less, but above that, it looked almost positive. So it was giving these positive results. So just reinforcing the importance of the need to dilute solutions, drug solutions, in order to get accurate results. And so the authors concluded that common concentrations of diphenhydramine, meth, and MDMA that are present in street drugs can indeed produce false positives. And so the author suggested diluting with at least 50 mils of water. This is a little bit more than a shot glass. And like in the video you saw, you can take a big gulp, you can take half a bottle of water, finding some common items that might be in the household. It doesn't have to be an exact science. I was talking to someone recently who was saying, I'm not going to bring my lab kit when I go to test my drugs. And so you just find what you can around the house. And it seems to be that over dilution will likely not be a problem, because remember, as we said, fentanyl test strips were able to detect very low concentration of fentanyl. They're highly sensitive. They were able to detect it at levels that mass spec couldn't even detect. And so I liked this quote that they put in the paper, this image that if half a milligram of fentanyl residue in a cooker is dissolved in a 10-liter bucket of water, so then we're working with a concentration of about 50 nanograms per mil. the fentanyl test strip will still detect that fentanyl is present in the solution. I wanted to talk about a couple recent developments with fentanyl test strips. So Dance Safe recently released a product that was designed for testing drug solutions. So this is no longer like an off-label use of a urine test strip. This is a test strip designed to test drug solutions. And I really love the information that they provide. They encourage testing everything that you intend to consume, meaning dissolve everything, and then evaporating the water afterwards, which they talk about how to do that here. In all reality, that's probably not going to happen. If somebody is wanting and ready to use, even waiting 2 minutes for a fentanyl test strip result can be a big ask. So I do think, you know, it would be ideal to have someone test their entire supply, but also fairly unlikely. And so then they provide a backup method too, realizing that it's not an all or nothing. We still want to provide ways that people can test their drugs and stay safe. And it shows how to test a number of different drugs. So blood or LSD, cocaine, heroin, all kinds of different drugs. Really great infographics. And then there's companies like MD Bio that have recently come out with multi-substance kits. And so this is just one of these kits have both fentanyl and xylazine test strips, which I'll talk about xylazine a little bit more here in a minute. And they come with a microscope and a solution to dissolve the drug into. They are much more expensive, of course. Interesting about this company as well, they have these kits and the packaging can be tailored to different organizations. So if an organization wanted to buy a bunch of these kits, they could tailor that packaging to kind of say what they want, brand it how they want. So I did think that was kind of neat, but these personally, I think are more expensive than what is really feasible for the demand right now. I wanted to highlight people who are using fentanyl test strips and what their perspectives have been. Multiple studies have indicated that people who use drugs are willing to use fentanyl test strips, especially as fentanyl was still emerging. Many people were eager to use fentanyl test strips and reported that they would change behaviors if they got a positive result, change their drug use, their overdose risk behaviors if they got a positive result. And other studies have shown that people in fact do change their behaviors as a result of using the fentanyl test strips. And so that may be things like using a test shot. They find that fentanyl is present in their supply. They'll make sure that someone is aware that they're using, or they might have, Narcan on hand, make sure that there's Narcan on hand, a number of different things that they can do to reduce their overdose risk. For the past, I would say, I don't know, since about May, I've been doing a study where we are giving surveys to people who use drugs and asking them about their fentanyl test strip use, and asking them what they do as a result of their fentanyl test strip use. We're then following up and doing interviews to hear more of the narrative, more of the context surrounding their fentanyl test strip use. And we're talking to people that use fentanyl test strips and people that don't use fentanyl test strips, people that have tried them, people that have tried them and stopped using them. We've talked to a number of different people, and what we're really hearing is that there's not a whole lot of information on anything other than this kind of black and white positive or negative. They don't have a lot of information on false negatives, false positives, invalid test results, or the different dilutions that are needed depending on the drug. Fentanyl test strips are available in a number of different places now, primarily syringe service programs. But we've also heard that that there are some in bars. Some of our colleagues in Ohio, they shared that that there were a bunch of barber shops that had fentanyl test strips available, along with some other harm reduction supplies. But in Kentucky, they're primarily in syringe service programs or other harm reduction centers. And so people that don't inject drugs may be unaware of resources like fentanyl test strips because they're not coming to the syringe exchange to exchange syringes if they don't inject. They may not be aware of all of the resources that exist. And so, even those that are not injecting, they're still, of course, at risk of overdose from fentanyl. And what we're also hearing is that many individuals are not getting enough fentanyl test strips to use every time that they use drugs. So ideally, they would be testing every hit. Before they prepare it, they're testing it, not just the batch, because we know that fentanyl can, the chocolate chip cookie effect, there can be chocolate chips concentrated in one area and not another. And so testing just one piece, one part of the supply is not sufficient. They really need to test every time, but they're not getting enough. And so that was something that we've been hearing, that people would like to use them more, but they are not able to because they would run out. So some advantages and disadvantages, we've covered a lot of these, but I just wanted to summarize. They are relatively inexpensive at the organization level. If you're talking about someone who is injecting, say, 4 to 5 times a day, and we are asking them to test every time, if folks weren't getting them for free and we're having to pay for them at about $1 a strip, that becomes very expensive very quickly. So they're relatively inexpensive compared to maybe some other, to a mass spec, say, and other resources, but it would be, the cost would be a burden to people who use, if they were using them on a regular basis. They are convenient. The person I talked to, like I mentioned, they said, they're not going to carry a lab kit to go test their drugs. And so it is nice to have just a thin little strip of paper that can easily go along, that can easily be transported wherever the person is going to use. The results usually take, about 2 minutes. And so that's relatively quick. Easy to use in theory, although, there does need to be better information shared about how to test and how to prepare the drugs for testing. Really high sensitivity and specificity and low detection limits, so people can be confident that even in small amounts of fentanyl in their drug, that the fentanyl test strips will detect it. As we talked about, there's false positives and false negatives. It's a qualitative result only, yes, no. We aren't able to provide information on purity or potency, concentration from the fentanyl test strips. It's kind of a counterintuitive result display. As I've been talking with folks, I have heard people say there were 2 lines, so it was positive. So even though, we say, 2 is better than 1, 2 means negative, 2 means negative, repeating it over and over, I think we are so used to seeing 2 lines as positive that it's easy to get that confused. And so I think it's really important to reiterate and repeat as much as possible so that people are empowered to read their test strips correctly. And then, of course, there's kind of this subjective interpretation, like we saw. There's this gradient, really, of a strong positive, a weak positive, a weak negative, a strong negative, and they aren't necessarily as straightforward to read as they might seem. But overall, I do think that they are a really useful tool for people to use, and it gives the consumer information, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, because we have an unregulated supply, people are being poisoned. They do not have the information they need as they are using. So this is a way to provide that information. There are, of course, emerging adulterants in the drug supply. Xylazine is kind of one of the latest ones, and it's an animal tranquilizer. I know there was a Kentucky Open on xylazine as well, so I'm not going to go into detail about it, but I do want to just mention what it is. So it really emerged in the street supply in about 2017, originally in the Northeast, Philadelphia, Maryland area, but it's been rapidly spreading throughout. And xylazine is primarily diverted. So unlike illicitly manufactured fentanyl that is not coming from diverted sources, and fentanyl, is being manufactured. Xylazine is being diverted primarily. That's how it's getting into the supply. It's also known as tranq or tranq dope, and it's typically mixed in with illicit opioids and other street drugs. Fentanyl or fent dope, this heroin fentanyl mixture just called dope, it's being found in that, also in meth, but it's also in other drugs as well. And so not only is its presence increasing, but its content is increasing as well. So the amount, the concentration that is within street drugs is becoming higher as well. And you can see here in this picture, these are the number of deaths, and the bars indicate the percentage of xylazine involved, or xylazine present overdose deaths. And you can see that they are increasing, and it's happening across all regions of the United States. So xylazine, it's kind of it's a bit polarizing, similar to fentanyl. Some people like it and some people don't. People report that it gives fentanyl legs. So the high from fentanyl is very quick, and xylazine is reported to extend those effects. However, it is a CNS depressant, so it can cause extreme sedation and could potentiate the respiratory depression that exists with opioids. And of course, we know it does not respond to naloxone because it is not an opioid. I'm sure you all are aware of the skin ulcers and abscesses that xylazine can produce regardless of someone's injection status. And so xylazine test strips, in response to this emerging threat in the drug supply, came on the market in the past year. So there's really not as much information about them like there is fentanyl test strips. However, they do work similarly to fentanyl test strips. So it's this competitive lateral flow immunoassay. And so, if you remember the colored antibodies that I was so excited about, where those want to bind to fentanyl, these want to bind to xylazine, okay? Again, 2 lines are negative, 1 is positive. And because these are coming out as a response to the emerging threat of xylazine in the drug supply, they are developed for use as a harm reduction tool, not as an after the fact drug test. And so there is more information on the front end about diluting, how to dilute the sample. As I mentioned, there's not a whole lot of studies out on the sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, negative predictive value of xylazine test strips. I think we will see more of that coming out in the literature soon. One study that I did find, though, tested 34 street drug samples. And in some of the other studies, some of those were street drug samples, some were not. And so that's important to consider too, because in a street drug sample, there can be all kinds of things mixed in. Whereas if you're buying it, from a lab or a pharmaceutical company, then it's regulated. You know exactly what you're getting. So they tested dope, which again is this heroin fentanyl kind of combination. Hard to say exactly what's in it. Cocaine, crack. Again, crack is in quotes because people might ask for crack, but it's not clear what exactly is in it. Methamphetamine and MDMA. So xylazine test strips were these xylazine test strips, these are the BTNX rapid response. They were highly sensitive. They had 100% sensitivity, no false negatives. So whenever xylazine was present in the supply, the test produced a positive xylazine result. Cocaine and fentanyl samples that were cut with lidocaine gave false positive results. But when they were further diluted, they did eventually give negative results. And so, I highlighted that here. You can see at a high concentration of lidocaine, a higher concentration of lidocaine, it gave a positive result. And this just means it was tested 3 times, and 3 times it gave a positive result. But once it was diluted down to a concentration of 1,000 nanograms per milliliter, it came up with a negative result. You can also see here, like with the other studies, they showed the test strips in increasing concentrations of xylazine, and you can see that at low concentration, the test line is barely visible, indicating a negative result. But that line really disappears as the concentration of xylazine increases in the sample. BTNX does say that their strips are not for testing cocaine, really because of this lidocaine reactivity, cross-reactivity. So they just suggest not testing cocaine with these test strips at all. I want to mention the legal challenges. On the left is a map of the US, and in green, that means that fentanyl test strips are legal, are considered legal, and in red, they are considered illegal. On the right is the same idea, but for xylazine test strips. And so, as many of you are aware, this is related to drug paraphernalia laws. And many states have laws that say that tools, things that are used to test drugs in order to consume them or to sell them means that they are drug paraphernalia. So even though these are used, the fentanyl test strips especially, they were being used off-label for that purpose. Their initial purpose was to test urine. They were urine drug screens. And so this has been a recent debate in a number of states. And you can see that there's been a lot of legal ground gained in terms of making fentanyl test strips legal across the US. There's still only a handful of states that are holding out. Xylazine test strips, on the other hand, is another story. And what this, some states prohibit distribution and possession of drug testing equipment flat out. None is available. Others, like Kentucky, allow exemptions for certain drugs. And some states have just excluded testing equipment from their paraphernalia laws altogether. Interestingly, Alaska is the only state that has no laws that criminalize the possession and or sale of paraphernalia for consumption purposes. In Kentucky, I put up our drug paraphernalia law here. You can see here that the definition of drug paraphernalia includes any equipment, products, materials that can be used for all of these listed purposes, including testing and analyzing. However, well, that provides the definition, and then here it says that it's unlawful to use them for testing purposes. However, we know that just earlier this year, there was an exception provided. Unfortunately, that exception only includes synthetic opioids or its analogs. And so, this then allows fentanyl test strips to be legal, possession of them not considered drug paraphernalia, which is a huge win. And, I'm so excited and thankful for that, but it's not enough because just as, we get fentanyl test strips legal and we're able to use them and pass them out, another drug like xylazine is popping up. And so now we are again in a position where we have to react to the changing drug supply, and it's going to come at the harm of people who are using drugs. And so unfortunately, you know, I wish that this exception would say, just not call out synthetic opioids or its analogs. Just any testing equipment shall not be deemed drug paraphernalia. That would be ideal, but unfortunately, that's not what it says. So xylazine test strips are, as written, not exceptions to this rule, and would still be deemed drug paraphernalia. I wanted to leave you with some resources for if you want to get fentanyl test strips for free, whether you're an individual or an organization, you can get them through the Kentucky Harm Reduction Coalition through Next Distro. I also just wanted to show some of the pricing here for Dance Safe. Those are the ones that I told you about that are designed for testing drug solutions. Dose Test is another company that has come out with fentanyl test strips and xylazine test strips. And what's interesting about them is that they also have an app that people can use that walks them through the test results. As far as xylazine test strip resources, I do know that Kentucky Harm Reduction Coalition has ordered the test strips. I don't believe they have them in yet, and I'm not sure what distribution will look like, if it will be as widely available as the fentanyl test strips are, or what that will look like. But for now, folks can order them from BTNX. Dose Test again has them, and then MD Bio does have xylazine test strips, just the strips, not kits. Or you can also get the kits, but as I mentioned, those are quite a bit more expensive. Also just showed the different pricing here. Dose Test, interestingly, they have like a low price guarantee. So they say that they have the cheapest test on the market. Although MD Bio is lower, but they say that if you find a lower price, they will they'll match it, and not just for you, but they'll change the price. So I'm not sure if that's happened or not, but anyway, xylazine test strips, you can see here that they are more expensive. They're newer, a newer technology, and so they are more expensive. I want to acknowledge my study team. They are the ones that are out in the field doing a lot of this research, the surveys, the interviews. I hate that this picture is blurry, but they're a great team, and they also helped find information for this presentation. I tried to include references as I could on the slides, but there were some I couldn't fit in, so I just wanted to include them here in case you're interested in additional reading. And at this time, I'll take any questions.
Hi, Christina. I said that I used the raised hand feature, so just feel free to come off mute to ask your question.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing because I can't see anyone.
It's totally fine. I do have a quick question for clarification. The SSP that I'm at today, like we do have xylazine approved, and we're gonna start using the test strips for xylazine. But there was some question about using them on cocaine. Like I know in the presentation, you said like with the that they can give false positives or whatever. Can you go into a little more detail about using them on specific substances like cocaine and give a little more information?
Yeah, I mean, right now, BTNX says with their rapid response test strips that they are not to be used with to be tested. Excuse me, that they are not to be used to test cocaine because of the cross reactivity. The study that I shared that let's see here. The study that I shared, that gave a bunch of interference controls for xylazine test strips in the lower when cocaine was in a higher concentration, it was coming up positive. And so it's possible, I would say if people are going to use the test strips to test their cocaine, dilute it. Make sure it's highly diluted, because it's very likely that the high concentration of lidocaine in cocaine may give a false positive result. So that would be my advice.
Like the dilution when you're using the fentanyl strips with methamphetamines, that kind of dilution?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it seems to be that over dilution, like I said, is not a problem. And so it's safe to use, probably half a cup or so of water with the cocaine powder. But I think I would make people aware of that as you're passing them out.
Yeah, I mean, we have amazing participants at this particular SSP who give us really good feedback on things. Like we have one guy who he stands out in my mind every time when I think about meth testing, because he was so he didn't need any fentanyl test strips. He didn't do that. And I was like, dude, like this is all it takes. And now he's like coming in here and getting test strips every time he comes in, and that's all he does is meth. So we're excited about the xylazine. We really are.
Yeah, I'm so glad. I've heard a number of organizations that have ordered them, that are going to be providing them, and I think it's just a game changer, because we do have such a toxic supply, and I'm so glad that they're becoming available, and that people are willing, that have courage to distribute them, regardless of any barriers that are in the way.
I just want to remind people, if there are questions that you have that you want to ask yourself, you're welcome to send me a private message. I'm happy to ask them on your behalf. And maybe just to give a couple more minutes for people to think of questions. I'm just curious, Dr. Vickers-Smith, if you've seen anything, like just thinking about like how to impact like the policy aspects, components for legality. Do you know if there's been any research or even where to try to see if there's a study that compares the states where I know probably just for the length of time you would need to compare the ones where fentanyl test strips are allowed and legal versus the ones that are illegal, and just seeing in terms of, I don't even know what the best comparisons would be. Would it be for I don't think you would just go straight to the number of like of overdose deaths, including fentanyl, but just like results that are able to compare states that allow versus those that are illegal, to try to help make the case for why these testing should be legal.
I'm not aware of any, but I love that idea, and somebody needs to do it. I think that's a great idea. There's studies that kind of these interrupted time series type of studies that show say for marijuana legislation, what kind of the health outcomes are before and after, how it's changed use and harms and things like that. And I think this would be, especially with xylazine test strips, we're in a kind of a natural experiment phase where it would be really interesting to see as they, are to become more widespread, how that's impacting harms related to xylazine. So Chris, I think you should do it. I think you should do that study.
Well, let's look for funding or something.
Right.
It'd be. It's great. I just think so much of as we've gotten into this, at least from recent, the implementation is often impacted by policies and what we're allowed to do. So just always trying to think of ideas for that. I saw within the chat a lot of thank yous, but I was just trying to make sure I didn't miss anybody's question. I see. Thank you. So again, if you do have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat or come off mute to make sure that we don't miss anyone else's question.
I'll put my email in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to reach out. Feel free. I'm usually one that comes up with questions like an hour later as I'm thinking about things. So feel free to reach out.